Welcome back to Cities on Console. Welcome if you're new. Today we'll be reacting to this week's featured highlights video. This week, of course, we're looking at electricity and water services in the game. So, the basic utilities you'll need to provide to your Sims in order to establish and grow your cities in Cities Skylines 2. Just before getting into the video, however, I want to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and to drop a like if you end up enjoying today's video or finding it informative. And, as always, please also feel free to drop a dislike if not, as any engagement is welcome and helps me improve the channel and make more of the content you all find helpful, entertaining, and worthwhile. But without further ado, let's get into this week's featured highlights.
To understand the basic needs of your citizens, you need only look in the mirror. Like you and me, there are a few important things they need.
So, I really like this view here. If we look closely, this one shot tells us a lot about the game. We can see the roads with grass and sidewalks, as well as some of the larger 4-lane road options, including some elevated roads out in the distance, and a little angled intersection here to the right. And as I've mentioned many times before, the houses look so great compared to what we had in the original game. These look like real modern American-style homes, and even the hedges, the yards, the patios, it all really looks great. And of course, that skyline and the environment and backdrop, I just can't wait to have these types of views on the 65-inch in my living room.
To live healthy, happy lives. That includes electricity, water, and sanitation. With these systems in place, everyone in your city has a shot at living their best life. Let's take a look at electricity.
This looks like a massive solar farm here, with what has to be over 100 panels. I wonder if these are modular and that this one has just been expanded over time, because I can't imagine needing such a massive solar farm for like a small town early in development. But it looks realistic for something that's meant to support a larger population in an urban area. We can also see a bit of a landfill off to the right, and what looks like maybe part of a water treatment plant or something here to the left. And I find this really cool. I like the idea of building large industrial or utility areas and having those things all kind of close to each other, as you would often see in the real world.
When laying roads, you also install low-voltage underground cables that supply electricity to homes, offices, and shops.
I really like this as a new function in the game. It makes a lot of sense and effectively will work the same way as it did in the first game, where power transferred between buildings sort of just magically, I guess, but no actual lines of power were involved. I also appreciate the detail of the menu here. We can see we are producing like over 10 times the power that we need, producing over 1600 megawatts and only consuming 139, which is maybe a bit strange, especially as we appear not to be exporting any of it according to this part of the menu. But I like how detailed the menu is in breaking down those things while still being easy to read, and I imagine easy to reference quickly while building in the game.
These cables plug into transformer stations. Transformer stations are also connected to the high-voltage power lines streaming from your city's power plants. They act as a junction where low-voltage cables and high-voltage lines link up. Together, they form the grid that pumps electricity right across your city.
So there's a very clear chain of events here, it seems. Of course, we need power plants to produce power in the first place, and then we have transformers acting as converters, essentially, from the very high-voltage energy straight from the source, convert it to the lower voltage needed to actually provide power to individual buildings and houses and whatnot. I definitely don't work in the utility industry, but it's my understanding that this is also true to the real world. But if anyone watching has a more experienced or educated understanding of these processes, please let us know in the comments if that is the case.
There's one drawback. Power lines and electric cables can only carry so much electricity. When demand increases, they can max out, creating a bottleneck. Keep the grid humming by evenly spreading electricity connections around your city. You can also build power lines to import electricity from neighboring cities. Imported energy will save your bacon if local power plants fail to produce enough electricity when demand increases.
I really like this as a new feature in the game as well. I could see being able to connect to power lines from outside connections being very cost effective in the early game. Instead of having to foot the cost of building an entire power plant in the early game with limited funds, temporarily using power provided by an outside connection sounds like it could be a great option to have. That said, I imagine just how cost effective either option would be will depend largely on the map, but I think that's cool too. It creates an opportunity for some real variation in how we might choose to start our cities.
It will, too. Expect spikes when the thermostat drops and everyone dials up their heaters. Hot weather will cause spikes too, as people flick on air conditioners, fans, and ice machines at the same time.
So power usage spikes were definitely a thing in Cities Skylines 1, but with seasons being a core function of the game this time around, I could see this taking managing power distribution to a whole new level that the first game hardly even scratched the surface of. So I'm really interested to see how this kind of plays out once we get our hands on it and are actually playing in-game.
Your power plants might produce more electricity than your city needs. When that happens, you can export it to your neighbors. While this can offset production costs, think it through. By storing excess electricity in emergency battery stations, you have nothing to worry about when demand rises. Emergency battery stations help your city get the most out of solar power plants. Battery stations power the city at night when the plant isn't producing electricity and recharge when they operate during the day. Of course, solar is just one renewable energy source. You can build wind, water, and geothermal power plants too.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge again just how massive these power plants are. The plants we saw in the first game were generally pretty small, aside from a couple of the higher level options were a little bit bigger, but these plants are monstrous even compared to those, which again I appreciate because it is yet another step toward realism in Cities Skylines 2.
Fossil fuels are another way to power your city, or you can go nuclear. Let's talk water and sanitation. Surface water sources are the same as in Cities Skylines. Expect flowing rivers.
The map looks enormous in this shot. You can see the skyscrapers off here in the distance, but there's this more rural town outside the main city and across the river here. This was essentially my dream for Cities Skylines 2 in one picture. As a console player, especially, locked to vanilla, and for the most part 9 tiles until the recent remaster with 25 tiles, which they still haven't even ported over all the content for, so it's arguable really whether you even consider that playable yet or not. But anyway, I never felt like I had the space to build little towns outside the main city. And it was honestly one of the things I've always wanted the most. So yeah, literally my dream as a console player represented in this picture here.
Glittering lakes, and vast, swirling oceans. Groundwater is different. These underground reservoirs replenish over time, so they can run dry if they're drained at a faster rate than they're refilled.
I really like this change. In the first game, we could drop a water tower pretty much anywhere we wanted, and it was essentially a never-ending source of water. Of course, that's super unrealistic. So having a limited number of areas with a limited amount of water in those areas, just like in the real world, makes a lot more sense. And I really like that there's a refreshment rate you'll have to contend with to kind of balance and make sure you aren't extracting too much.
They're also susceptible to ground pollution. When they're contaminated, dirty water is pumped into your city's freshwater system. That's bad on every level, mainly because decontamination takes a long time. Build a groundwater pumping station to tap this resource, and a water pumping station to bring surface water into your city's water system. You can also add water to the system with wastewater treatment plants. These plants can process sewage to produce clean water for homes and businesses.
So it's confirmed we can use water treatment plants to treat sewage water and return it to the city's supply. There's nothing really new about this because that was also in the last game, but it's worth mentioning that the assets look so much better than they did in Cities 1 yet again. And I do appreciate the number of options available. Being able to mix the use of open water sources, groundwater, and even sewage that has been treated and converted back to a state suitable to pump back into the city's water supply.
There's another way to manage sewage: sewage outlets. They release waste into open water, which can help prevent sewage from backing up. And that's a must when it comes to public health. Bungling waste management can make people seriously ill. That's why you want to keep sewage outlets well away from pumping stations. How can you balance the very human needs of citizens with your ambition as a city builder? It's simple. Imagine living your life down there, day in and day out.
Okay, so I think we're just about at the end of the video here, but I want one final look at this particular shot. Everything looks spectacular. The environment, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of visible trees, which couldn't render in the first game. The mountains and water are just beautiful, and as I keep saying, the buildings and the infrastructure are just so much more realistic. I really can't wait to build a city like this and just spend hours flying around with these kinds of views, or even zooming into the street level to see what everybody's up to. It's all going to be so much fun. And yeah, so that does bring us to the end of the video. What are you all thinking about electricity and water services in Cities Skylines 2? We definitely start with a lot more options for power than we did at the beginning of the original Cities Skylines, and the water services have definitely been expanded as well. And in my own opinion, it pretty much all looks like improvement, but I'm curious to know what everybody else thinks. Let me know in the comments. And lastly, if you made it this far into the video, I appreciate you hanging out with me today and want to ask you again to consider subscribing if you haven't already, and hitting that like button if you enjoyed today's video or found it informative, as it really helps the video's performance. And in as much as you did not enjoy the video today, please feel free to leave a dislike as well. All that said, thanks again and have a great day.